It's illogical to say that Jews do not belong to Israel. That is because if a certain ethnocultural group has to develop, then humans have to live in a continuous expanse of land for quite a period of time, right? That is how the common customs and culture and traditions arise. So if you look back at history, around 3,500 years ago, then Jews lived in this land between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River, which is the present-day Israel. And around 2,000 years ago, when the Romans conquered this region, this was a time when there were no organized religion in this world. Like Jesus Christ was born 2,000 years ago, so there's no question of Christianity being there then. And Islam had its foundations in 700 AD. So when we look at 2,000 years back in history, then when Romans conquered this region, the people of this region, the Jews, they did not worship to Roman gods, and they were hence persecuted. And as a result of this, we can see a migration of Jews from this land, this region of Israel, which was called by different names as different kingdoms, into Europe. So these people started migrating to Europe. But in Europe, these people were actually minorities. And once you're a minority, whatever minority it is, religious minority or a linguistic minority, you are easy target of persecution. You are vulnerable. And that happened with the Jews. And to mark my point, you can see that in history, Adolf Hitler had massacred 50 lakh Jews, a genocide of Jews in the gas chambers. He collectively collected all the Jews in a chamber and passed poisonous gas there. So they were in fact exterminated. And thus there was always a kind of sympathy towards the Jews in the international community. And if I were a Jew, then how would I look at it? I would look at it that this has happened because I don't have a country of mine. I don't have a military of mine. I don't have my political leaders. I don't have my own police. And this is the reason that these kind of things happen. And a natural movement developed in Europe, which we call as the Zionist movement, that is going back to the cultural homeland movement, that is going back to what we call as the present-day Israel. But in the meantime, many kingdoms ruled this region after the Romans left. And if you see, this region is surrounded by all Arab-speaking regions, Arab-speaking kingdoms, which are present-day Arab states like Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, and so on and so forth. So in the meantime, if you look at around the early 20th century, then the Ottomans were ruling this region, the Ottoman Turks. And by that time, most of the people who were living in this region were Arabs. Okay, so Arabs now had lived in this region for quite a long period of time. And the Jews from Europe, they were thinking of going back to this land. So they were migrating to this land in camps, in batches. And this activity started from around 1920 onwards. But when the British defeated the Turks in the First World War, they gained the impetus. The Jews gained the impetus and they started migrating more and more into this region. And by 1939, it is said that half of the population of this region were Arabs and half of the population were Jews. So there was population equity there. The Jews had always fought for the British. So during the World Wars, they were a part of the Allied powers. They in fact fought for the Allied powers. And in return, there was always some kind of a sympathy from the Americans and the British towards the Jews. They even promised the Jews of a homeland in this region. So from the period around 1900s to 1940s, when the British ruled this region, actually 1920s to 1940s, there was a continuous influx of Jews into this region. And naturally, since Arabs had been living in this area for quite a long time now, they resisted this immigration of Jews. You are in a place for say 300, 400 years and suddenly some batch of people come from outside and they start living in your land. They build their settlements. You wouldn't like it, right? So there was a natural opposition of Arabs towards this influx of Jews. And as I said, by 1940s, the population of Jews equaled the population of Arabs in this region. So now the Arabs had to fight for two things, for two causes. One is to gain the civil rights from British administration. Their case was similar to our case in India. We had to fight with the British to gain civil rights like freedom of speech, the right to work, the right to attain certain positions and stuff. So the similar rights the Arabs they had to fight against the British for. And second thing is that when Britain was delegating its power, not exactly delegating, was withdrawing from the entire region and handing over the power to the native people, the Arabs they had to ensure that the British hand over the power to the Arabs and not the Jews. This was a critical situation over there. A situation of conflict, in fact. We also have the similar situation wherein the British handed power to two nations, India and Pakistan. They created Pakistan and they handed power to India and Pakistan, to both the nations. So there was this tussle as well between the Arabs and the British that the power needs to be handed over to them, and at the same time they were fighting for their own civil rights. So the British had also promised the Palestinians that their civil rights would not be affected just because there are Jewish people living in settlements around them. But because Britain withdrew from this region prematurely before settling this question of a Jewish homeland, which they promised the Jews, and also transferring of civil and military rights, the entire power to the Arabs over there, they withdrew prematurely. And now there was a vacuum of power in this region. And the Jews declared independence. So what United Nations envisaged in 1947 was two states, one for the Arabs and one for the Jews, and an independent city of Jerusalem which will be ruled by the UN mandate. So why would Jerusalem be independent? Because Jerusalem happens to be an important city for people of three religions. One is Islam, Christianity and Judaism, that is the Jewish religion. For Jews, this was the place, the area around this place was the region from where their religion came from. For Christianity, for the Christians, Jesus lived in his early years around this region. And for the Muslims, Prophet Muhammad ascended into heaven from this place. So this place happens to be, this region, this city happens to be an important religious site for people of three different religions. And that's why one particular religion cannot dominate the other religion at this place, should not be doing it. That is why the United Nations emphasized on having a UN mandate in this particular city. So two states and one city. But before all this could happen, and also if you look at the United Nations plan, that seems to be quite fair, in the sense that even Arabs got equal part of the land, and even the Jews got equal part of the land. That was like around 50-50 sharing of the land, equal division of the land. But before this plan could be implemented, the British withdrew from this region. The British withdrew from this region in 1948, and that led to terrible consequences. And why is it so? That was because now there was a vacuum of power in this region. Although the Arabs had lived in this region along with the Jews, the real controller there, the real administrator there were the British. So, seeing that there was a power vacuum, the Jews proclaimed independence and declared the establishment of a state of Israel. Now, naturally, the Palestinians were not happy with it because they had been living in that land for quite a large time now. And all the Arab countries surrounding this region and the Palestinians, amongst which the Jews lived in enclaves, in settlements, they had a war.